This story spans more than a decade and a half, exposes serious gaps in oversight and supervision systems, and ultimately demonstrates how persistence, sharp instincts, and a stroke of luck can finally unravel even the most carefully hidden secrets. We will go through the events step by step, drawing from public records, witness statements, and official investigative reports. The goal is to understand what happened, how the system responded over the years, and the valuable lessons that emerged. Emma Thompson was born on April 12, 1982, in Fresno, California. Her mother, Laura Hayes, raised her primarily as a single parent after a brief relationship with Emma's biological father, who played no role in her upbringing. When Emma was 8 years old, Laura married David Hayes, a plumber. The couple welcomed a daughter, Lily, in 1990, giving Emma a younger half-sister. In September 1992, the family made a major move. They left the suburbs of Fresno and relocated to Placerville, a small, quiet town nestled at the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, about an hour's drive from Sacramento. They chose this area because they believed the fresh mountain air, surrounding pine forests, and tight-knit community would provide a safer environment for raising their daughters, far from the risks of bigger cities. In the early 1990s, Placerville was a charming small town known for its gold rush history, peaceful streets, and close connection to nature. Families often allowed children to walk short distances to school bus stops without much concern. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. Emma, by then 10 years old, was adjusting well to the change. She was a fifth grader at Placerville Elementary School, a shy girl with light blonde hair, blue eyes, standing about 4 feet 7 inches tall and weighing around 77 pounds. She had freckles across her nose, a small gap between her front teeth, a faint chickenpox scar on her forehead, and a distinctive star-shaped birthmark on her left wrist. Her favorite color was lavender. She often wore lavender outfits, and that detail would later become a powerful symbol as the community rallied around her family. On the morning of Monday, June 15, 1993, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Laura Hayes had already left early for her job at a local printing shop. Emma was dressed in her favorite lavender ensemble, a lavender windbreaker, lavender leggings, and lavender sneakers. She kissed her stepfather goodbye and began her usual walk uphill along Apple Hill Lane toward the school bus stop. The route ran against traffic, a short distance from their home, flanked by tall pine trees on both sides. David Hayes stood in the garage, watching Emma as she walked away. He later described her as looking happy, skipping lightly as she headed up the hill. It was around 7:55 a.m., a crisp mountain morning. Then suddenly, a car appeared. Witnesses, including David from his vantage point, and several children already waiting at the bus stop, described it as a mid-sized gray sedan, possibly an older Ford Granada or similar model, two-tone gray. The vehicle made a U-turn at the top of the hill and pulled up alongside Emma. David saw 2 people inside, a man driving and a woman in the passenger seat. The woman reached out, grabbed Emma, and pulled her into the car. Emma screamed and struggled as she was forced inside. David heard her cries clearly, a sound that would haunt him forever. He immediately jumped on his bicycle and pedaled furiously after the car, chasing it uphill as it sped away, but the vehicle was too fast. Exhausted and panicked, David turned back, ran to a neighbor's house, and frantically called 911. "My daughter has been kidnapped," he shouted into the phone. "A gray car just grabbed her off the street." Other witnesses confirmed the details. Children at the bus stop watched the abduction unfold in broad daylight. One child described the woman forcing Emma into the back seat. The car fled quickly, heading down the mountain road. Law enforcement responded almost immediately. El Dorado County Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. The area was secured, and initial interviews began right away with David Hayes and the child witnesses. Descriptions of the vehicle were consistent: an older gray sedan with 2 occupants, a man and a woman. The search launched that same day. Local volunteers poured in, joining deputies to comb the surrounding woods and neighborhoods. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Canine units specialized in tracking and cadaver detection arrived from Sacramento and nearby areas. Divers searched nearby rivers and reservoirs, while off-road vehicles covered remote logging roads. Roadblocks were established on Highway 50 and other key routes. Officers stopped every gray sedan matching the witness descriptions, checking trunks and questioning drivers. Hundreds of vehicles were inspected in those initial days, but none led to a breakthrough. Investigators quickly compiled a composite sketch of the suspects based on multiple eyewitness accounts. David Hayes had seen the woman's face clearly as she pulled Emma into the car. Children at the bus stop provided similar details: a white female, approximately 35 to 45 years old, with long dark or brownish hair, wearing a floral or patterned top or dress. The male driver was described as white, possibly in his mid-40s, with dark hair. The vehicle was consistently identified as an older gray sedan, possibly with wood-grain side panels or front-end damage. By June 17, the FBI had formally assumed lead under the federal kidnapping statute, assuming the abductors might have crossed into Nevada. Special agents from the Sacramento field office set up a command post at the Placerville substation. One of the first major public moves came swiftly. On June 19, just 4 days after the abduction, America's Most Wanted aired a segment on Emma's disappearance. Host John Walsh described the brazen daylight snatch, showed the composite sketches, and displayed Emma's school photo. The episode included reenactments and appealed directly to viewers for tips. The broadcast generated hundreds of calls to the dedicated hotline almost overnight. Within the first week, more than 600 leads poured in. Some were obvious dead ends, people reporting gray cars they'd seen weeks earlier, or neighbors settling old grudges. Others required immediate follow-up. One caller claimed to have seen a gray sedan with a screaming child parked at a remote turnout near Coloma just hours after the abduction. Search teams and dogs were dispatched, but found nothing. Another early lead focused on a gray Ford Granada spotted in the nearby town of Auburn the day after the kidnapping. The vehicle matched the description closely, including wood-grain trim. Deputies located the owner, a local man with no criminal history, and interviewed him extensively. He provided an alibi supported by co-workers, and the car was thoroughly examined. No evidence linked it to Emma. Investigators also pursued registered sex offenders in the region. California's sex offender registry was still in its early stages and far less comprehensive than today, but agents cross-referenced known predators within several hundred miles. Dozens were interviewed and polygraphed. None emerged as viable suspects. Media coverage was intense and sustained. Local stations ran near-constant updates. National outlets picked up the story, emphasizing the boldness of a daylight abduction in a small community. Laura Hayes appeared in multiple press conferences, often holding Emma's favorite lavender stuffed bunny. Her pleas were raw and emotional. "If you have my daughter, please let her go. She needs to come home." David Hayes also spoke publicly, though his interviews drew mixed reactions. Some questioned his account of chasing the car on a bicycle, and tabloid speculation began to swirl. Despite passing a polygraph and cooperating fully, David found himself under public scrutiny. The family's stress was compounded by this unwanted attention. Community response, however, was overwhelming. Volunteers organized the search parties that continued for weeks. Lavender ribbons, Emma's favorite color, appeared on trees, mailboxes, and car antennas throughout Placeville and beyond. fundraisers were held to support reward money and printing costs for posters. National Missing Children's Organizations set up coordination efforts. By late June, tens of thousands of flyers had been distributed nationwide. Businesses from gas stations to supermarkets displayed Emma's photo. One foundation offered a $75,000 reward, pushing the total posted reward over $150,000 at one point. As summer turned to fall, physical searches scaled back. The terrain around Placeville is vast and rugged. After months of effort, investigators concluded Emma had almost certainly been taken out of the immediate area by vehicle. The focus shifted to long-term investigative strategies, tip management, media reappeals, and database cross-checks. Age-progressed images were created and circulated periodically. Periodic billboards went up along major California highways. Years passed with no solid breaks. Anniversaries brought renewed media attention and public vigils. Laura Hayes kept Emma's bedroom exactly as it had been, a shrine to hope. Lavender ribbons faded but remained tied to trees along Apple Hill Lane. Behind the scenes, the case file grew thick with thousands of leads investigated and ruled out. What investigators and the public could not know in those early days of June 1993 was that the answers were no longer hidden somewhere in the rugged Sierra Nevada foothills. Emma Thompson and her abductors had been taken to a quiet, middle-class suburban neighborhood less than 3 hours west by car, in the city of Concord, California, a commuter town in Contra Costa County, known for its family-friendly streets, shopping centers, and easy access to the Bay Area. The trail had gone cold almost immediately, not because of any major failure in the initial massive search effort, but because the perpetrators had slipped into a carefully constructed life of secrecy that would remain undetected for more than 16 years. To understand how Emma Thompson could vanish for so long, we have to go back further, to the man who took her and the system that allowed him to be free in the first place. Robert James Harlan was born on October 18, 1948, in Oakland, California. By most early accounts, his childhood in the East Bay suburbs was unremarkable. He was described as quiet, somewhat solitary, with an early interest in electronics and audio equipment. As a teenager, he began experimenting with various substances, particularly amphetamines and hallucinogens, which he later claimed opened his mind to spiritual messages and gave him the belief that he could influence people through carefully modulated sound frequencies. Harlan's criminal history began to take shape in the late 1970s. He had several minor arrests for drug possession and petty theft, but nothing violent until March 14, 1979. That night, a 28-year-old woman named Sarah Mitchell, who worked as a waitress in a casino restaurant in South Lake Tahoe, finished her late shift and walked to her car in the employee parking lot. Harlan approached her, asking for directions, then suddenly attacked her with a stun device he had modified himself. He bound her hands with zip ties, forced her into her own vehicle, and drove her across the state line to a rented warehouse space in Reno, Nevada, which he had already prepared as a confinement area. For several hours, he subjected her to repeated assaults. Sarah later testified that Harlan had soundproofed parts of the space with foam panels and heavy blankets, installed dim lighting, a small heater, and even a portable cassette player, clear signs of premeditation. She managed to escape when a security guard, responding to a report of a suspicious vehicle, approached the building and began knocking. Harlan was arrested shortly afterward. Because the abduction had crossed state lines, the case fell under federal jurisdiction. In 1980, he pleaded guilty to kidnapping and was sentenced in federal court to 40 years in prison. Nevada state charges for sexual assault added a concurrent life sentence. Psychiatric evaluations conducted during the trial and sentencing were deeply concerning. One federal report described Harlan as having severe narcissistic personality traits combined with delusional beliefs about controlling others through auditory means. Another evaluator warned of a high risk of recidivism, noting that his crimes appeared carefully planned and that he showed little genuine remorse. Despite these red flags, Harlan became eligible for parole after serving just 12 years. In July 1992, over the strong objections of the original federal prosecutor and the sentencing judge, the U.S. Parole Commission granted his release. The decision cited his participation in prison substance abuse programs, completion of several vocational courses in electronics, and letters of support from family members who promised to provide housing and supervision. Upon release, Harlan was initially placed under federal parole supervision. He moved back to California, settling in Concord at 1427 Maplewood Drive, a modest single-story home owned by his aging mother, Evelyn Harlan, who lived in the front part of the property and suffered from early-stage dementia. In late 1992, Harlan married Diane Morales, a woman he had met through prison correspondence years earlier. Diane had been married previously. She divorced her first husband after beginning a relationship with Harlan while he was incarcerated. They married in a proxy ceremony inside the prison in 1988, and she joined him in Concord shortly after his release. By the summer of 1993, Robert Harlan was 44 years old and technically still under federal parole supervision for the remainder of his original sentence. His conditions included regular reporting to a parole officer, random drug testing, no contact with minors, and a requirement to notify authorities of any changes in residence or employment. A parole officer was assigned to his case, conducting periodic home visits and collateral checks with neighbors and employers. Harlan worked sporadically as an independent electronics repair technician, fixing televisions, stereos, and other audio equipment out of a small workshop he set up in the garage. Neighbors in the Maplewood Drive area quickly noticed Harlan's unusual behavior. He would spend hours in the front yard testing large outdoor speakers, playing loud music mixed with what he called healing frequencies, or preaching about spiritual enlightenment through sound. He printed flyers and business cards for his one-man business, Harlan Audio Ministries, and distributed them around the neighborhood. Several residents called the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office over the years to complain about excessive noise, especially late at night. Deputies typically responded, asked him to turn the volume down, and left. Because the complaints were non-criminal and Harlan was cooperative on the surface, no deeper investigation ever took place. What almost no one knew in 1993 was that Robert Harlan had already begun constructing a hidden living space behind the house. Over the 3 years since his release, he had gradually built a series of connected sheds, canvas enclosures, and outbuildings in the large backyard, carefully concealed from street view by a tall wooden privacy fence, thick hedges, fast-growing bamboo, and layers of blue tarps. The compound included soundproofing materials, carpet remnants, foam panels, heavy curtains, basic electrical wiring run from the main house, a small propane cooking setup, and multiple locked doors. The entire area was designed for complete concealment and control. Investigators searching for Emma in the summer of 1993 had no reason to connect her case to Robert Harlan. His prior crime had occurred 14 years earlier in a different part of the state against an adult victim. While the Blitz-style abduction of a lone female had superficial similarities, the vast age difference of the victim, the lack of any vehicle registered to Harlan matching the gray Ford Grenada description, and the incomplete cross-referencing of old federal parole records with new child abduction cases kept him completely off the radar. In the years immediately following Emma's abduction, Harlan's parole file noted several minor technical violations, failed drug tests for methamphetamine, late reports, but he avoided revocation by enrolling in outpatient treatment programs. His federal supervision was eventually transferred to California state parole in the late 1990s due to a change in jurisdictional policy, a bureaucratic shift that would later prove critical. By the afternoon of June 15, 1993, when the gray sedan pulled through the side gate into the backyard at 1427 Maplewood Drive, Robert Harlan had already prepared a small, soundproofed shed, roughly 8 feet by 8 feet, with a mattress on the floor, a bucket toilet, a battery-powered lamp, and a portable heater. The door locked only from the outside. Emma Thompson's long ordeal had begun. Emma Thompson's arrival at 1427 Maplewood Drive on the afternoon of June 15, 1993, marked the beginning of an ordeal that would last more than 16 years. The house itself was unremarkable from the street, a single-story ranch-style home typical of 1960s suburban construction, with a small front lawn, chain-link fencing on the sides, and a covered porch. Passers-by saw nothing out of the ordinary, but behind the tall wooden privacy fence and thick vegetation that lined the backyard, Robert Harlan had created a completely concealed world. The gray sedan was driven directly through a side gate into the backyard, shielding the arrival from any street view. Harlan and Diane carried the terrified 10-year-old girl into the first structure Harlan had prepared, a small, soundproofed shed about 8 feet by 8 feet. The interior had carpet remnants glued to the walls and ceiling for noise reduction, a thin mattress on the floor, a plastic bucket for sanitation, a battery-powered lantern, and a small electric space heater plugged into an extension cord running from the main house. The door could only be locked from the outside with a heavy padlock. For the first several years, Emma's world was confined almost entirely to this cramped space and a series of connected canvas tents and additional sheds that Harlan gradually added over time. The backyard compound evolved slowly but deliberately. Harlan added more layers of fencing, tarps, plywood panels, and fast-growing plants to block any possible line of sight from neighboring properties. Over the years, the setup included several locked rooms, outdoor areas covered with blue tarps for shade, a rudimentary outdoor shower using a garden hose, a small propane stove for basic cooking, and piles of old appliances, car parts, and debris that further obscured visibility. Electricity was jerry-rigged from the main house through buried extension cords. Water came from garden hoses. The entire area was designed for isolation and control. Harlan maintained dominance through a combination of physical restraints, constant threats, and psychological manipulation. He repeatedly told Emma that her family had given up looking for her, that the outside world was dangerous and full of people who would hurt her, and that he and Diane were the only ones keeping her safe. He warned that any attempt to escape would be met with severe punishment, and that he had watchers and guard dogs, though none were consistently present. He also shared his delusional beliefs that he was a chosen messenger, that sound could control minds, and that everything happening was part of a larger spiritual plan. Food in the early years was basic. Fast food brought from drive-thrus, canned goods, sandwiches, and whatever Diane prepared in the main house and carried out. Showers were infrequent, hygiene limited. Clothing came from whatever Harlan or Diane provided, often second-hand or mismatched items. In 1996, when Emma was 14, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter, inside the compound. Diane assisted with the delivery. No medical professionals were involved. 3 years later, in 1999, Emma gave birth to a second daughter, again with only Diane present. The two girls grew up knowing only the hidden world behind the fences. Harlan told them the outside was filled with evil forces and danger, and that he was their protector. They were homeschooled sporadically using outdated workbooks, library books Diane occasionally borrowed, and whatever educational materials Harlan deemed appropriate. As the children grew older, living conditions improved slightly, not out of compassion, but for practicality. By the early 2000s, the girls had their own small tents with beds, a shared play area under the tarps, and later a television and VCR for watching movies Harlan selected. The compound included a portable air conditioner for summer and additional heaters for winter. Meals were sometimes eaten together under the tarps. Emma and the girls helped with chores, cooking simple meals, cleaning the enclosures, tending a small vegetable patch Harlan had planted, and later assisting with his audio repair business by organizing parts or stuffing envelopes for his ministry flyers. From the outside, glimpses were rare and fleeting. Neighbors occasionally heard children's voices or laughter drifting over the fence, but the layout, layers of tarps, bamboo, and junk piles, made it nearly impossible to see clearly. One neighbor later recalled hearing a child call out "hello" over the fence in the late 1990s, but when she looked, only Harlan was visible, staring back. Another resident remembered seeing two young girls briefly in the driveway during the mid-2000s, but assumed they were visiting relatives. Harlan's bizarre behavior in the front yard actually helped deflect suspicion. His loud music tests, religious preaching, wild hair, intense eyes, and constant talk of spiritual frequencies made most neighbors avoid him rather than approach. He was simply known as the weird guy on the block. In later years, as the girls reached their teens, Harlan allowed them very limited outings, always accompanied by him or Diane, and always with strict instructions on what to say if anyone spoke to them. They were told to call him father in public and to claim they were part of a homeschooling religious family. Emma, by then in her late 20s, was introduced as a relative or assistant when necessary. These rare trips to grocery stores, fast food restaurants, or parks were tightly controlled and infrequent. By 2009, the compound had become a strange, self-contained world. The two daughters, then 13 and 10, had never attended public school, never seen a doctor, and had no official records of their existence. Emma had not used her real name in 16 years. She had adapted in order to survive and protect her children, helping with household tasks and enduring the isolation. The backyard prison was only about 50 feet from the sidewalk, in a neighborhood where children rode bikes, families walked dogs, and delivery drivers came and went.
Yet no one ever breached the barriers Harlan had so carefully constructed. The compound's very existence relied on a perfect storm of deception, isolation, and repeated oversight failures. Failures that occurred regularly, sometimes monthly, through official visits that should have uncovered everything. One of the most frustrating aspects of Emma Thompson's long captivity is how many times the system had the opportunity to discover her and did not. Robert Harlan remained under active parole supervision for most of the time he held Emma and her daughters captive. Between 1992 and 2009, parole agents visited the Maplewood Drive property more than 50 times. Some visits were announced, others were unannounced. Yet not a single agent ever stepped foot into the backyard compound where Emma and the girls were hidden. The oversight began with federal parole after Harlan's 1992 release. For the first several years, a federal parole officer handled the case, requiring monthly reports, drug tests, and home visits. Harlan's file noted ongoing methamphetamine use and increasingly bizarre religious claims, but violations were addressed with warnings, short jail stays, or mandated treatment rather than revocation. In 1998, a major jurisdictional change occurred. Due to shifts in federal parole policy, many older cases were transferred to state supervision. Harlan's supervision was handed over to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. This transfer created immediate gaps. The state received incomplete files and critical details, such as the premeditated nature of the 1979 crime and the federal psychiatrist's warnings about high recidivism risk, were not fully highlighted or flagged. Under state parole, Harlan was classified as a standard sex offender registrant rather than the highest risk tier, partly because his original conviction predated California's modern tiering system. His assigned parole agents often carried heavy caseloads, 50 to 70 high-risk parolees each. Home visits were supposed to be monthly, but in practice they were sometimes less frequent. Agents who visited the Maplewood Drive property consistently stayed in the front house. Evelyn Harlan, Robert's elderly mother, would answer the door. Robert and Diane kept the living room tidy for these occasions, with religious materials neatly displayed. Agents spoke with Harlan, checked for prohibited items like weapons or drugs, and left. The backyard was never inspected, even though parole conditions explicitly allowed searches of the entire property.
In 2005, another agent documented additional structures in the backyard, tents and sheds visible from satellite imagery available to law enforcement at the time. The observation was noted but never followed up. The most glaring missed opportunity came in October 2007. A next-door neighbor, concerned by ongoing noise and suspicious activity, called the non-emergency line. He reported hearing children's voices and believing people were living in tents in the backyard. A Contra Costa County Sheriff's deputy responded, knocked on the front door, and spoke with Harlan, who explained that he ran a small religious group in the backyard and that his nieces sometimes visited. The deputy asked if he could see the backyard. Harlan refused, stating it was private property and that a warrant would be required. Instead of pressing the issue, contacting parole authorities who could have conducted a warrantless search under parole conditions, or documenting the concern more thoroughly, the deputy left after about 20 minutes. He wrote a brief report describing it as a welfare check and closed the matter. These repeated failures were not the result of a single negligent individual, but of systemic issues: overburdened caseloads, inadequate training on supervising high-risk sex offenders, poor interagency communication, and a culture that too often accepted surface-level compliance. By mid-2009, Emma had been captive for over 16 years. Her daughters had never known freedom. The compound had grown more elaborate, with additional locked gates and soundproofed spaces, and still the monthly parole visits continued, agents knocking on the front door, accepting Harlan's explanations, and leaving without ever realizing that 3 lives were hidden just feet away. It would take something entirely different, an unexpected encounter far from parole offices and routine checks, to finally bring the truth into the light. By the summer of 2009, Robert Harlan's delusions had intensified to a new level. For years, he had been compiling writings about his supposed ability to heal mental and spiritual afflictions through divine sound frequencies. He claimed to receive messages from higher powers instructing him to share this revelation publicly. He printed pamphlets, recorded audio messages, and even composed simple songs on an old synthesizer in his workshop. Harlan decided the ideal place to launch his message was the University of California, Davis, a large, open campus known for its free speech events, public forums, and diverse student body. The campus was about a 45-minute drive from Concord, making it accessible. On August 18, 2009, Harlan drove to UC Davis with his 2 daughters, then 13 and 10 years old. He carried a folder of printed materials and sought permission to hold a small gathering called Sound of Healing on campus grounds the following week. He wanted to set up speakers, distribute flyers, and speak openly about his beliefs. The next day, August 19th, Harlan returned to the campus with the girls. This time, he went to the Office of Student Activities and was directed to speak with Maria Gonzalez, a campus event coordinator with more than a decade of experience handling public requests. Gonzalez met Harlan in her office, where the two girls stood quietly behind him. Gonzalez immediately felt something was off. Harlan spoke rapidly and erratically about spiritual frequencies, mind healing, and divine missions. His eyes were intense, almost feverish. But what alarmed her most was the girls' demeanor. They were unusually pale, expressionless, and avoided eye contact. When Gonzalez tried to engage them directly, asking simple questions like their names, ages, or favorite subjects at school, they glanced at Harlan before answering in soft, rehearsed voices. The older girl introduced herself as Elena, the younger as Harmony. Their responses were overly formal, almost scripted. Gonzalez's instincts told her this was not a normal family dynamic. She told Harlan she would review his request and asked for contact information. He handed her a business card for Harlan Audio Ministries and an email address. After Harlan left, Gonzalez immediately confided in her colleague, Officer Carla Reyes, a member of the UC Davis Police Department assigned to event support. Gonzalez described the encounter. "Those girls were like they were in a trance. Something doesn't feel right." Reyes agreed and offered to run a quick background check. That afternoon, Reyes used law enforcement databases to look up Robert Harlan. The results were shocking. Harlan was a registered sex offender with a federal conviction for kidnapping and sexual assault from 1979. The case details appeared: an abduction of an adult woman near South Lake Tahoe, followed by hours of captivity in a prepared space. Reyes recognized the severity immediately. The two women discussed next steps. Campus police had limited authority off campus, but they knew Harlan was on active parole. They decided to contact his parole agent directly. Reyes called the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and reached Harlan's assigned parole officer, Marcus Lee. She explained the campus visit, the request for a public event, the presence of the two young girls, and Harlan's criminal history. She expressed serious concern for the children's welfare, noting their unusual behavior and complete reliance on Harlan. Lee checked his file. Harlan had never reported having any children. Parole records listed no minors living at the Maplewood Drive address. Lee told Reyes he would schedule an immediate home visit and asked her to keep him updated. The next morning, August 20, Harlan returned unannounced to the UC Davis office with the two girls. He wanted to follow up on his permit and brought more printed materials. Gonzalez and Reyes stalled him while quietly notifying Officer Lee that Harlan was back on campus with the children. Lee instructed his supervisor to authorize a parole hold for bringing minors to a university without prior approval, among other potential violations. He drove to Davis himself and asked campus police to detain Harlan temporarily and separate the girls for questioning. Around 2:15 p.m., Harlan was taken into a campus police interview room. The girls were placed in a separate room with a female officer. When asked basic questions about their ages, schooling, and family, the girls gave inconsistent and evasive answers. They claimed to be homeschooled and said their mother was running errands. Lee arrived and began questioning Harlan. At first, Harlan maintained his story. The girls were his daughters with Diane, and they were a religious homeschooling family. But under sustained questioning, separated from the girls and confronted with inconsistencies, Harlan's narrative began to crumble. He admitted the girls were not Diane's biological children. He claimed they belonged to a former partner who had left them with him. Then, in a rambling shift, he said something that chilled Lee. "There are no victims here. I've transformed my life. I have something so important it will change everything." Lee pressed harder. Harlan's story changed again. Finally, in what investigators later described as an almost casual moment, Harlan said he had made mistakes in the past, but that the situation at home would explain everything. He asked if the girls could be released to their mother. Lee contacted the Concord Police Department and requested an immediate welfare check at 1427 Maplewood Drive. Officers arrived within minutes and spoke with Diane Harlan, who appeared visibly nervous and evasive. They also located Emma, now 27 years old, inside the main house. She initially identified herself as Elena and supported Harlan's story about the girls being hers. But when separated from Diane and interviewed privately by a female detective, Emma's composure finally broke. In a quiet, trembling voice, she said, "I'm Emma Thompson. I was taken when I was 10 years old." The detective asked if she was okay. Emma replied, "No, I have 2 daughters. They're out there with him." Within hours, the property was secured as a crime scene. Search teams moved into the backyard and discovered the hidden compound. The layers of fencing, tarps, locked sheds, sound-proofed rooms, jury-rigged utilities, children's toys, clothing, journals, and signs of long-term habitation. Emma and her daughters were taken to a safe reunification site at a local hotel under FBI protection. DNA testing quickly confirmed Emma's identity. On August 21, 2009, Laura Hayes received the call she had waited for more than 16 years. Her daughter was alive. News broke nationwide that evening. The lavender ribbons, the gray sedan abduction from 1993, the long unsolved mystery, all suddenly resolved in a suburban backyard less than 200 miles away. Robert and Diane Harlan were arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, sexual assault, and multiple counts related to the captivity of minors. The rescue had taken less than 48 hours from the moment Maria Gonzalez first noticed something unusual about the 2 silent girls. Investigators later credited Gonzalez and Reyes with exceptional intuition and persistence. Their decision to run a background check and contact parole authorities, when many might have dismissed Harlan as just another eccentric, set the entire chain of events in motion. The breakthrough came not from a massive manhunt or a lucky tip, but from 2 women in a campus office who refused to ignore their instincts about 2 pale, quiet children. The reunion on August 21, 2009 was both miraculous and deeply emotional. Emma Thompson, now 27, met her mother Laura Hayes and her younger sister Lily, who had been only 3 when Emma disappeared and was now 19, in a private room arranged by the FBI. Laura had carried Emma's school photo in her wallet for 16 years. When Emma walked in, Laura later said she recognized her daughter instantly, those same blue eyes, that faint star-shaped birthmark. The first meeting between Emma and Lily was tearful but gentle. Emma's daughters, aged 13 and 10, met their grandmother and aunt for the first time. The girls were overwhelmed by the sudden flood of new faces, voices, and affection. In the weeks that followed, Emma and her daughters entered protective custody and began intensive counseling. They were given temporary new identities and relocated to a safe house. Medical examinations confirmed that none of the 3 had seen a doctor in more than 16 years. Basic health needs were addressed, vaccinations updated, and therapy sessions started to help process the unimaginable trauma. The legal process moved swiftly. Robert and Diane Harlan were charged in El Dorado County, the same jurisdiction where Emma had been abducted, with dozens of felony counts, including kidnapping, rape, false imprisonment, and lewd acts with a minor. Both initially pleaded not guilty, but as evidence mounted, journals, photographs, recordings, DNA, and Emma's detailed testimony, their defenses collapsed. In March 2011, Robert Harlan changed his plea to guilty on all major counts as part of an agreement to avoid the death penalty. On May 15, 2011, he was sentenced to 425 years to life in prison. The judge described the crimes as profoundly evil and noted that the sentence ensured he would never be free again.
Diane Harlan also accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to kidnapping, false imprisonment, and aiding in the assaults. On the same day, May 15, 2011, she was sentenced to 32 years to life. Prosecutors emphasized that Diane had played an active role, helping with the initial abduction, assisting in the births, and enforcing the isolation for years. The sentences brought formal justice, but attention quickly turned to the systemic failures that had allowed the captivity to continue undetected for so long. The California Office of the Inspector General conducted a thorough review in late 2009 and early 2010. The resulting report was devastating. It documented more than 30 separate missed opportunities where basic supervision protocols had not been followed. Supervisors had failed to adequately review files, risk assessments had been consistently underestimated, and the 1998 federal-to-state transfer had left critical historical warnings unheeded. In response, the governor publicly apologized to Emma and her family on behalf of the state. Several parole officials faced discipline or reassignment. California strengthened its sex offender supervision policies. Caseloads for high-risk parolees were reduced, GPS monitoring was expanded, and mandatory full property searches, including outbuildings, were reinforced. Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office also acknowledged the 2007 deputy visit that failed to probe deeper. New training emphasized partnerships with parole authorities and the use of warrantless search authority. Emma filed civil lawsuits against the state of California and the federal government for negligence in Harlan's supervision. In 2011, the state settled for $18 million, acknowledging the profound harm caused by repeated oversights. A separate federal settlement followed in 2012 for an undisclosed amount. Using part of the settlement funds, Emma established the Emma Thompson Foundation in 2012, focused on supporting families affected by abduction and long-term trauma. The foundation provides counseling grants, therapy support, and transitional resources for survivors and reunified families. Emma chose a path of gradual healing and re-engagement with the world. In 2013, she published a memoir titled Taken, A Life Reclaimed, written in her own words. The book became a bestseller, offering the public her perspective, focusing on survival, motherhood, and resilience rather than graphic details. A second book, After the Silence, followed in 2018, chronicling her experiences of rediscovering simple joys, tasting new foods, learning to drive, watching her daughters attend school for the first time, and rebuilding family bonds. Emma's daughters adapted remarkably well under the circumstances. They enrolled in school, made friends, pursued hobbies, and grew into young women with bright futures. Emma has remained protective of their privacy, rarely allowing media access. The Maplewood Drive property was demolished in 2013. The site was later turned into a small community garden, a place of renewal instead of pain. Investigators from the original 1993 case closed the file with a mix of relief and regret. Many had carried Emma's photo for years, attending annual vigils. The resolution brought closure, but also reflection on what might have been discovered sooner.
Today, Emma Thompson lives quietly with her family, advocating selectively, but primarily focusing on healing and normalcy. In a rare 2019 interview, she said, "I don't spend my time on what was stolen from me. I choose to live for what I have now." This case remains one of the longest-known stranger abductions with survival in modern history. It exposed deep flaws in parole supervision while highlighting the power of instinct, two campus officials who refused to ignore their concerns, and the unbreakable bond of a family separated for more than 16 years. What happened to Emma Thompson was unimaginable cruelty, enabled by unimaginable oversight. Yet her story, and the story of her daughters, is ultimately one of survival, reunion, and the quiet strength required to rebuild a life after so much stolen time. Thank you for following this journey through one of the most haunting and ultimately hopeful true crime cases of our time. If topics like abduction, trauma, or family separation have affected you or someone you know, resources are available through organizations such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.